let's just see what today's archetype is going to be. Today's archetype is Fire and Earth, the Warrior. So that's the one that we'll be doing today. Now, the Warrior is an archetype whose predominant element is fire and whose inner element is earth. And that kind of like tells you a lot about him. The symbol for him is things like, you know, volcanoes erupting out of the earth. And I think you could say that, for instance, if you're going to link this to the natural world, the Warrior is very much like the magnetic field of the earth, which protects it from all sorts of things, yeah, which would otherwise destroy life on earth. And it comes basically from the inner core of the earth, which is iron and nickel, and iron is ruled by Mars. And also this, you know, fiery, molten mantle which circulates around it. All these things very, very warriorish, yeah, which are the very heart of the earth. And in fact, Mars in Roman mythology was in fact the child of Juno. Mars was the child of Juno, without a father, in fact. So you can see there are all sorts of interesting things there. Mars was also originally an agricultural god. You can see there's a lot of earthiness underneath the surface in this actual archetype. But it is a fiery archetype, without doubt. It's a very fiery archetype. In people, it manifests as the capacity to do, the capacity to act, and it's forceful, it's will, it pushes against resistance, it can bring about things. It's power in the sense of energy which can be deployed against a resistance to do work. Yeah. So without this archetype, you basically can't do stuff, really. It's what allows you to be and do in the world. Yeah. And so obviously it's a very essential archetype in that way. It allows effectiveness. It brings effective action. It brings effectiveness to whatever it touches, really. Yeah. Obviously at its best, it's essential, and also it's a very protective archetype at its best as well. This is like the protective action of the father as well, you know, protecting his children or whatever, this sort of stuff. So there are a lot of very, very positive qualities to this archetype which tend to not always be recognized. But it is a tremendously important archetype. Now, when things get blocked and don't work well, then we see it's as if that fireness gets divorced from its earthy inward meaning, in a sense, and then we get just this sort of like rigid competition. Yeah, because it's also a competitive archetype, and that's okay, it's good, that's what allows things to move forward in various ways. But it becomes destructively competitive, it becomes violent, it becomes bullying, it becomes the use of force simply just to get its way, rather than to serve its meaning or its inner purpose. So we find this with this archetype as well. You can get into these very difficult places with it, where it is destructive. Yeah. You find its immature and uninitiated manifestations in adolescence, yeah, who just want to deface and destroy everything, or just have no principles, just run roughshod over everything, and just destroy, deface, damage trees, throw garbage everywhere, you know, just graffiti everything really, really ugly, in a really ugly way, you know, not artistic or anything. You find that, and also, you know, there's a lot of stuff there with, in terms of just in terms of violence, really petty violence and stuff like this, and that is, in a sense, a very immature, uninitiated, and very false, really, manifestation of children trying to achieve that archetype, if you see what I mean. So, and it's ugly, it's horrible, and it's destructive. But the archetype itself, you know, just as with the Earth and its magnetic field, just as with the fact that, you know, we get volcanoes because the Earth is alive. This is an extremely essential archetype for life, and it is also being on the Earth fire quadrant of the wheel. This archetype has a very, very strong sexual feel to it as well, in some ways, in that you know, it also is that very, very male procreative urge as well, you know, to impregnate and to sort of like make this impression, and to penetrate and this sort of stuff. These are all the sort of like these very, very basic stuff, yeah, and that all comes from this as well. So even in an purely biological and physical sense, without this archetype, there's no life, you know. So we see all these kind of things with it too. Of course, he turns up in all sorts of fairy tales and mythology. He's the giant, you know, in the fairy tale. He's the warrior. He can be the knight. You can see him really, I think, very well in the god Thor as well, who, although he's a sky god, yeah, he's very much a protective, defensive god, yeah, who is the child of the earth, and has this fiery red beard, and you know, carries this hammer, you know, which he uses. So you see, Thor is a very, very good example of a kind of a warrior archetype in mythology. Of course, there are others as well, but he's quite a pure one, I think, because he's very fiery and very earthy. I think that's about it, I'd say, for what I could say about this archetype for now. An essential archetype, but one that gives us a lot of problems, because we don't actualize him properly, yeah, and because we fail to actualize him, in fact, and so it's something to be understood, because we need him for our lives. We need him to be effective. We need him to defend ourselves and defend everything we value, and we need him to have any kind of effectiveness and to be able to basically do anything. So that's the warrior. Have a look at him and see what value you can find in him and how to actually actualize him positively.